story part. The morning sun cast long shadows across the cobblestone courtyard of Buckingham Palace as Marcus Thompson adjusted his red tunic for the 100th time. At 26, he had been serving as a royal guard for 3 years, but the responsibility never felt routine. Every day brought the weight of protecting one of the world's most famous residences and its occupants. Marcus stood at attention near the main gates, his bearskin hat perfectly positioned, his rifle secured at his side. Tourists gathered behind the iron railings, cameras clicking constantly, hoping to capture the stoic guards who had become symbols of British tradition. Children pressed their faces against the bars, trying to make the guards smile or move, unaware that beneath the ceremonial uniform stood highly trained soldiers. The palace grounds buzzed with controlled activity. Gardeners tended to the immaculate flower beds, their movements careful and deliberate. Security personnel in plain clothes moved through the crowds, their trained eyes scanning faces and watching for anything unusual. Palace staff hurried between buildings, carrying out the countless tasks required to maintain the royal residence. Marcus had learned to read the rhythm of the palace. He could distinguish between the purposeful stride of a staff member and the wandering gait of a lost tourist. He knew which faces belonged to regular visitors and which ones appeared for the first time. This skill had been drilled into him during months of rigorous training, where instructors emphasized that a royal guard must be both a symbol and a sentinel. The morning shift had started like any other. The changing of the guard ceremony had proceeded flawlessly, drawing cheers from the assembled crowd. Visitors from around the world had watched in amazement as the guards performed their precise movements, their boots striking the ground in perfect synchronization. The pomp and pageantry masked the serious security operation that ran beneath the surface. As the crowds began to thin after the ceremony, Marcus noticed a man lingering near the eastern gate. The stranger wore a worn brown jacket and carried a small backpack. His hair was disheveled and his clothes suggested he had been sleeping rough. London had many homeless individuals, and they occasionally wandered near the palace grounds, usually moving along when approached by security. The man paced back and forth along the railings, his movements becoming increasingly agitated. Marcus observed him through his peripheral vision, maintaining his rigid posture while tracking the potential threat. The stranger muttered to himself, gesturing wildly at times, drawing concerned looks from passing tourists. Detective Inspector Sarah Chen had been monitoring the palace security cameras from the control room when she first spotted the agitated individual. With 15 years of experience in protection services, she had developed an instinct for recognizing when someone posed a genuine threat versus those who were simply eccentric or distressed. This man exhibited several warning signs that made her reach for her radio. The stranger's behavior escalated gradually. He began shouting at the guards, his voice carrying across the courtyard. His words were mostly incoherent, a mixture of grievances against the government and demands to speak with members of the royal family. Palace security had protocols for dealing with such situations, but each case required careful assessment. Marcus maintained his position, following procedure by not engaging directly with the agitated individual. Other security personnel began moving closer, their movements subtle but coordinated. The key was to avoid escalating the situation while ensuring everyone's safety. The man reached into his backpack and pulled out what appeared to be a tool. From Marcus's position, it was difficult to identify exactly what the object was, but the stranger began waving it in the air while continuing his tirade. Tourists started backing away, sensing that something was wrong. Detective Inspector Chen coordinated the response from the control room, directing plainclothes officers to strategic positions around the perimeter. The protocol was clear: assess, contain, and neutralize threats with minimal disruption to normal operations. The palace welcomed millions of visitors each year, and maintaining an atmosphere of accessibility while ensuring security required constant vigilance. The stranger's shouts grew louder and more aggressive. He pressed himself against the iron railings, the tool clutched tightly in his right hand. Marcus could now see that it was a screwdriver, its metal shaft gleaming in the morning sunlight. The man pointed it toward the guards while continuing his incoherent demands. Years of training had prepared Marcus for moments like this. Every guard understood that their ceremonial role could transform into active security duty within seconds. They were soldiers first, symbols second. The beautiful uniforms and traditional ceremonies existed alongside very real security responsibilities. Other tourists in the area began to notice the commotion. Some pulled out their phones to record, while others moved their children away from the scene. The atmosphere shifted from casual sightseeing to nervous tension as people realized they were witnessing something potentially dangerous. The man with the screwdriver suddenly stopped shouting. An eerie silence fell over that section of the courtyard as he stared directly at Marcus with wild, unfocused eyes. His grip on the tool tightened, and his body language suggested he was preparing to take some kind of action. Security personnel continued their careful approach, maintaining safe distances while positioning themselves to respond if necessary. Radio chatter increased as the situation developed, with officers reporting positions and requesting additional backup units. Marcus felt his heart rate increase, but his training kept him focused and calm. He had practiced scenarios like this countless times during exercises, but facing a real threat felt different. The weight of his responsibility pressed down on him as he realized that the next few minutes could determine whether this situation ended peacefully or tragically. The stranger took a step back from the railings, raised the screwdriver above his head, and let out a primal scream that echoed across the palace grounds. The confrontation that had been building throughout the morning was about to reach its climax, and everyone present would soon discover just how quickly trained professionals could respond to protect the symbol of British monarchy. Story part. The stranger's scream sent shockwaves through the crowd of tourists, who scattered in different directions, some running toward nearby streets while others ducked behind whatever cover they could find. Parents grabbed their children and hurried away from the palace gates, their vacation photos forgotten in the face of genuine danger. Detective Inspector Chen immediately activated the emergency response protocol from the control room. Within seconds, her voice crackled through radio communications to all security personnel on the grounds. Backup units stationed around the palace perimeter began converging on the eastern gate. Their movement swift but controlled. Marcus remained motionless in his position, his training overriding every instinct to react to the chaos around him. Royal guards were taught to maintain their posts unless directly ordered otherwise, serving as both protectors and symbols of stability, even in crisis situations. His eyes tracked the armed man's every movement while his ears listened for commands from his superiors. The man with the screwdriver began climbing the iron railings with surprising agility for someone who appeared disheveled and possibly homeless. His fingers found purchase between the ornate metalwork as he hauled himself upward, the tool clutched between his teeth. The height of the fence, designed to deter exactly this kind of intrusion, seemed to present little obstacle to his determination. Sergeant Williams, the senior guard on duty, spoke quietly into his radio microphone, coordinating with the plainclothes security team that was moving into position. Years of experience had taught him that situations like this could escalate rapidly, and the key was maintaining control while avoiding unnecessary force. The climbing man reached the top of the railings and paused, balancing precariously on the narrow iron spikes that crowned the fence. For a moment, he swayed dangerously, and several witnesses held their breath, expecting him to fall back onto the sidewalk. Instead, he steadied himself and looked down at the palace grounds with wild eyes. Dr. James Morrison, a psychiatrist who happened to be touring the palace with his family, recognized signs of severe mental distress in the intruder's behavior. From his position near a tour group, he watched the unfolding drama with professional concern. The man's erratic movements and incoherent shouting suggested possible psychosis or extreme emotional breakdown. The stranger swung one leg over the spikes and began descending into the palace grounds. His movements were awkward and desperate, tearing his jacket on the sharp metal points. Blood appeared on his arms where the spikes caught his skin, but he seemed oblivious to the pain. Security cameras captured every moment of the intrusion from multiple angles. In the control room, operators recorded the incident while simultaneously coordinating the response. The footage would later be analyzed to improve security protocols and provide evidence for any legal proceedings. As the man dropped the final few feet to the ground inside the palace perimeter, armed police officers emerged from strategic positions. They had been stationed throughout the grounds in plain clothes, virtually invisible to tourists but ready to respond to exactly this kind of threat. Their firearms remained holstered, but their hands were positioned for quick access. The intruder stood up slowly, still gripping the screwdriver. His clothes were now torn and bloody from his climb over the fence, but his determination appeared undiminished. He looked around at the manicured gardens and historic buildings, seeming momentarily disoriented by finding himself inside the famous compound. Officer Patricia Reeves was the first to approach, her training in crisis intervention guiding her actions. She spoke in calm, measured tones, trying to establish communication with the disturbed individual. Her goal was to de-escalate the situation before it required physical intervention. The man ignored her attempts at communication, instead focusing his attention on the guards who stood at their posts around the courtyard. He raised the screwdriver above his head and began walking toward Marcus, his steps unsteady but purposeful. The metal tool gleamed menacingly in the bright morning sunlight. Marcus could feel sweat beading on his forehead beneath his bearskin hat, but his expression remained impassive. Every fiber of his being wanted to step aside or raise his rifle, but protocol demanded that he maintain position until receiving direct orders. The trust placed in Royal Guards was absolute, and that trust required absolute discipline. The approaching threat moved closer with each passing second. Other security personnel shadowed the intruder's movements, maintaining safe distances while preparing for intervention. Radio communications buzzed with position reports and tactical assessments as the professional security team coordinated their response. Tourists, who had not fled the immediate area, watched in fascination and horror from behind whatever cover they could find. Camera phones captured the drama, though most people were too frightened to focus on getting good footage. The incident would later appear on news broadcasts around the world, highlighting both the security challenges facing royal residences and the professionalism of those who protect them. The man with the screwdriver stumbled slightly as he crossed the gravel path, but quickly regained his footing. His wild eyes remained fixed on Marcus, and he began muttering under his breath again. The words were still largely incoherent, but the aggressive tone was unmistakable. Sergeant Williams made the decision that the situation had escalated beyond the point where passive observation was sufficient. He gave the signal for intervention, knowing that the safety of the guards and any remaining civilians took precedence over concerns about public relations or diplomatic sensitivity. The response was immediate and coordinated. Multiple officers moved simultaneously from different directions, their approach calculated to minimize the chance of the intruder escaping or causing harm to others. Years of training and countless exercises had prepared them for exactly this moment. The armed man suddenly broke into a run, charging directly toward Marcus with the screwdriver raised like a weapon. His face contorted with rage and desperation as he closed the distance between himself and the motionless guard. The confrontation that had been building throughout the morning was about to reach its violent climax. Story Part 3. The charging intruder covered the remaining distance to Marcus with frightening speed, his boots crunching against the gravel as he raised the screwdriver high above his head. Time seemed to slow as the trained guard finally received the radio command he had been waiting for. Engage and neutralize the threat. Marcus's military training took over completely. In one fluid motion, he shifted his stance, brought his rifle across his body defensively, and prepared to counter the attack. His movements were precise and economical, the result of hundreds of hours practicing combat scenarios in training facilities across England. The attacker was less than 10 feet away when Officer Patricia Reeves executed a perfect tackle from the side, her body hitting the intruder at hip level and sending him sprawling across the courtyard. The screwdriver flew from his grasp, skittering across the stone pavement and coming to rest near a flower bed filled with carefully maintained roses. The takedown was textbook perfect, demonstrating the effectiveness of coordinated security response. Within seconds of the tackle, 3 more officers converged on the scene. Detective Inspector? Chen watched from the control room as her team professionally subdued the threat with minimal force and maximum efficiency. The intruder struggled frantically as officers worked to restrain him, his mental distress making him unpredictable and difficult to control. He continued shouting incoherently, his voice echoing off the palace walls as security personnel carefully but firmly secured his arms behind his back. Dr. Morrison, still observing from his position with the tour group, noted the careful way the officers handled the disturbed individual. Despite the man's aggressive behavior and potential for violence, they used only the force necessary to ensure everyone's safety. Their restraint spoke to extensive training in dealing with mentally unstable individuals. Marcus slowly returned to his ceremonial position, his breathing controlled despite the adrenaline coursing through his system. The transformation from potential combat back to ceremonial guard required mental discipline that few outside the military could fully appreciate. His rifle returned to its proper position as if nothing had happened. The subdued attacker was carefully searched for additional weapons while paramedics were called to treat the cuts he had sustained climbing over the palace railings. Blood from his wounds stained his torn clothing, and his wild eyes darted around the courtyard as if he was seeing it for the first time. Sergeant Williams coordinated the aftermath of the incident with practiced efficiency. Evidence needed to be collected, witness statements taken, and normal security protocols restored as quickly as possible. The palace operated on strict schedules, and disruptions needed to be minimized to avoid affecting other planned activities. The abandoned screwdriver was photographed in place before being carefully collected as evidence. Forensic specialists would later examine it for fingerprints and other clues that might help determine the attacker's identity and motivations. Every aspect of the incident would be thoroughly documented for security reviews and potential legal proceedings. Tourists who had witnessed the dramatic confrontation began emerging from their hiding places, many still clutching their phones and cameras. The incident had lasted only a few minutes from start to finish, but the professional response had prevented what could have been a tragic situation. News crews began arriving at the palace gates within minutes of the incident, having been alerted by social media posts from witnesses. The story of an armed intruder confronting royal guards would quickly spread around the world, highlighting both the security challenges facing public institutions and the skill of those who protect them. The restrained attacker was placed on a stretcher and prepared for transport to a secure medical facility, where he could receive both physical treatment for his injuries and psychological evaluation. His rambling speech continued as he was loaded into the ambulance, suggesting severe mental health issues that had likely contributed to his actions. Detective Inspector Chen began the process of reviewing all security camera footage from the incident. Every angle would be analyzed to identify any procedural improvements and to provide a complete record of events for official reports. The palace security team took pride in their professionalism and constantly sought ways to enhance their effectiveness. Marcus remained at his post as the crowd of onlookers gradually dispersed. His role required him to return immediately to normal duties, standing as a symbol of continuity and stability, even after facing a direct threat. Other tourists arriving at the palace would see only the traditional ceremony and pageantry, unaware of the drama that had just unfolded. The incident would later be cited in training manuals as an example of proper threat assessment and coordinated response. Every member of the security team had performed their assigned role perfectly, from the initial observation and alert to the final neutralization of the danger. Officer Reeves received commendation for her quick thinking and perfect execution of the takedown that ended the threat. Her split-second decision to tackle the charging intruder had prevented potential injury to the guard and demonstrated the value of having highly trained personnel positioned throughout the palace grounds. The palace groundskeepers quietly went about their work, cleaning up the minor damage caused by the scuffle and ensuring that the historic grounds remained in pristine condition. Within hours, there would be few visible signs that anything unusual had occurred in the normally peaceful courtyard. Dr. Morrison later reflected on how the incident highlighted the challenges facing security personnel, who must balance accessibility with protection. The palace welcomed millions of visitors each year, and maintaining openness while preventing threats required constant vigilance and professional expertise. As the morning progressed toward noon, normal activities resumed around the palace. The changing of the guard ceremony continued on schedule, tour groups gathered for their planned visits, and the royal residence returned to its usual rhythm of controlled activity and carefully managed public access. The successful resolution of the confrontation demonstrated that behind the pageantry and tradition of the royal guard stood genuine military professionalism and dedication to duty, qualities that had protected British monarchs for centuries and would continue to do so in an increasingly complex security environment. Story Part 4. The aftermath of the incident brought a flurry of investigative activity as authorities worked to piece together the identity and motivations of the disturbed individual who had threatened the palace security. Detective Inspector Chen coordinated with multiple agencies to ensure a thorough examination of every aspect of the case. At St. Mary's Secure Hospital, Psychiatrist Dr. Elizabeth Harper conducted the initial evaluation of the attacker, who had been identified through fingerprints as Robert Davies, a 42-year-old former construction worker. His medical records revealed a history of mental health struggles and recent homelessness, following the loss of his job and apartment. Davies sat quietly in the secure evaluation room, his earlier agitation replaced by a vacant stare. The cuts from climbing the palace fence had been cleaned and bandaged, but his mental wounds ran much deeper. Dr. Harper noted signs of severe depression mixed with possible psychotic episodes that had likely contributed to his desperate actions. The investigation revealed that Davies had been living rough in London parks for several weeks before the incident. Fellow homeless individuals described him as increasingly paranoid and angry, talking obsessively about perceived injustices and government conspiracies. His decline appeared to have accelerated in recent days as his mental state deteriorated further. Back at the palace, security analysts reviewed hours of surveillance footage to create a complete timeline of events. They identified the moment Davies first appeared near the grounds, tracking his movements and behavior patterns throughout the morning. The analysis would help improve future threat detection and response protocols. Marcus Thompson underwent a routine debriefing with his commanding officers, standard procedure after any security incident. Despite his professional handling of the situation, the experience had been intense, and military protocol required ensuring that all personnel involved remained fit for duty. The guard described his thoughts and reactions during the confrontation with clinical precision, his training having prepared him for exactly this kind of post-incident analysis. His calm professionalism during the crisis had exemplified the standards expected of royal guards, earning praise from his superiors. Officer Patricia Reeves also participated in the formal debriefing process, her split-second decision to tackle the charging intruder being analyzed in detail. The successful intervention would become a case study in police training programs, demonstrating how proper positioning and quick thinking could prevent potentially tragic outcomes. Media coverage of the incident spread rapidly across international news networks, with dramatic headlines describing the confrontation between the armed intruder and royal security forces. However, palace officials were careful to emphasize that the individual appeared to be mentally disturbed rather than a terrorist or political extremist. The screwdriver that Davies had wielded as a weapon was examined by forensic specialists, who confirmed it was a common household tool with no modifications or special features. The choice of weapon suggested spontaneous rather than premeditated action, supporting the assessment that mental illness rather than criminal intent had driven his behavior. Social media platforms filled with amateur video footage captured by tourists during the incident. The recordings showed the professional response of security personnel and the calm demeanor of the royal guards throughout the crisis. Many commenters praised the restraint shown by officers in dealing with an obviously disturbed individual. Dr. Morrison, the psychiatrist who had witnessed the incident while visiting with his family, provided a statement to investigators describing his observations of Davies' behavior. His professional assessment supported the conclusion that the man had been experiencing a severe psychiatric episode rather than acting from calculated malice. The Palace Security Review Board convened an emergency meeting to analyze the incident and identify any procedural improvements. While the response had been textbook perfect, they maintained a commitment to continuous improvement and learning from every security challenge. Homeless advocacy groups in London expressed concern about Davies' situation, pointing out that his case highlighted the inadequate mental health resources available to vulnerable individuals. They called for increased funding for psychiatric services and better support systems for those experiencing homelessness and mental illness. Davies' former employer provided investigators with information about his declining work performance in the months before he was terminated. Colleagues described a man who had once been reliable and skilled, but gradually became erratic and paranoid, refusing offers of help and isolating himself from friends. The hospital treatment team developed a comprehensive care plan for Davies, focusing on psychiatric stabilization and eventual rehabilitation. Dr. Harper believed that with proper medication and therapy, he could recover from his current crisis, though the legal consequences of his actions would need to be addressed. Legal experts began reviewing the case to determine appropriate charges, balancing the need for public safety with recognition of Davies's obvious mental health challenges. The Crown Prosecution Service would ultimately decide whether criminal proceedings were in the public interest given the circumstances. Security footage revealed that Davies had made several previous visits to the palace area in recent weeks, though his behavior during those earlier occasions had not risen to the level requiring intervention. The pattern suggested a gradual escalation of his fixation on the royal residence. Palace officials emphasized that the incident demonstrated the effectiveness of their multi-layered security system, which had prevented any actual harm while treating the disturbed individual with appropriate restraint. The professional response had protected both the public and the mentally ill man himself. Training. Instructors at the Royal Guard Academy immediately began incorporating lessons from the incident into their curriculum. The successful resolution provided real-world validation of their teaching methods while highlighting areas where additional preparation might be beneficial. The international diplomatic community took note of how British security forces had handled the situation, recognizing it as a model for dealing with similar challenges at sensitive locations worldwide. The balance between accessibility and protection remained a constant challenge for democratic societies. As the investigation continued, a clearer picture emerged of Davies as a troubled individual whose life had spiraled out of control rather than a calculated threat to national security. His case would ultimately contribute to broader discussions about mental health services and social support systems in modern Britain. Story Part 5. 3 weeks after the incident, Robert Davies sat in a comfortable chair in the psychiatric ward of St. Mary's Hospital. His appearance dramatically different from the wild-eyed intruder who had charged at the palace guards. Proper medication and regular meals had restored some clarity to his thinking, though he still struggled to fully comprehend the magnitude of his actions. Dr. Elizabeth Harper reviewed his progress notes with cautious optimism. The combination of antipsychotic medication and intensive therapy had stabilized Davies's condition significantly. However, the road to full recovery would be long, and the legal consequences of his actions still loomed ahead. Davies had begun to express genuine remorse for his behavior. Though his memories of the actual incident remained fragmented and confused, he described feeling as though he had been watching someone else's actions during those chaotic moments at the palace, a common experience for individuals recovering from severe psychiatric episodes. The hospital's occupational therapy team worked with Davies to rebuild basic life skills that had deteriorated during his months of homelessness and mental decline. Simple activities like maintaining personal hygiene and following daily routines required patient relearning as his mind gradually cleared from the fog of untreated mental illness. Meanwhile, at Buckingham Palace, normal operations had long since resumed. Marcus Thompson continued his duties as a royal guard, though the incident had deepened his appreciation for the serious nature of his ceremonial role. Fellow guards treated him with increased respect after his professional handling of the dangerous situation. The palace security team had implemented several minor procedural changes based on their analysis of the incident. These included enhanced coordination between guard posts and control room operators, as well as improved positioning of plainclothes officers during peak tourist periods. Officer Patricia Reeves had been commended for her actions and selected for advanced training in crisis intervention techniques. Her successful takedown of Davies had prevented potential tragedy while demonstrating the effectiveness of having highly trained personnel strategically positioned throughout the palace grounds. Detective Inspector Chen completed her comprehensive report on the incident, which would serve as a reference for future security planning. The document detailed every aspect of the response, from initial detection of the threat through the final resolution, providing valuable lessons for law enforcement agencies worldwide. Social services investigators worked to understand how Davies had fallen through the cracks of London's support systems. Despite having a documented history of mental health issues, he had received minimal assistance during his descent into homelessness and psychological crisis. The investigation revealed systemic problems in how mental health services, housing assistance, and employment support agencies coordinated their efforts. Davies's case became a catalyst for discussions about improving communication between different government departments responsible for vulnerable citizens. Legal proceedings moved forward cautiously, with prosecutors recognizing the complex nature of Davies's situation. The Crown Prosecution Service ultimately decided to pursue charges related to trespassing and threatening behavior, while recommending treatment and rehabilitation rather than punishment as the primary focus. Davies's court-appointed attorney, Sarah Mitchell, worked to present a complete picture of her client's mental health struggles and the circumstances that led to his desperate actions. She emphasized that he posed no ongoing threat to public safety when properly medicated and supervised. The magistrate who would hear the case reviewed extensive psychiatric reports detailing Davies's condition and treatment progress. The legal system faced the challenge of balancing public safety concerns with compassion for an individual whose actions had been driven by severe mental illness rather than criminal intent. Media attention gradually shifted away from the dramatic confrontation to focus on broader issues of mental health, support and homelessness in British society. Several charitable organizations reported increased donations and volunteer interest following coverage of Davies's situation. Dr. Morrison, the psychiatrist who had witnessed the incident while visiting the palace with his family, volunteered to serve as an expert witness in Davies's case. His professional observations during the confrontation would help establish the defendant's mental state at the time of the offense. The Royal Guard Training Academy incorporated detailed analysis of the incident into their standard curriculum, using it as an example of how quickly ceremonial duties could transform into active security situations. New recruits learned about the importance of maintaining both military readiness and public composure. Palace tourism officials noted that visitor numbers had actually increased following the incident, with many tourists expressing appreciation for the professional response of security personnel. The dramatic confrontation, resolved without serious injury, had paradoxically enhanced public confidence in royal security measures. Davies began participating in group therapy sessions with other patients who had experienced similar psychiatric crises. Sharing his experiences helped him process the trauma of his mental breakdown while providing hope for others struggling with comparable challenges. His treatment team developed a comprehensive discharge plan that would include supervised housing, continued psychiatric care, and vocational rehabilitation services. The goal was to provide Davies with the support structure he needed to rebuild his life and avoid future crises. The case attracted attention from academic researchers studying the intersection of mental health and security concerns in public spaces. Several universities began collaborative projects examining how institutions could better identify and assist individuals experiencing psychiatric emergencies. Housing advocates used Davies's story to illustrate the urgent need for increased funding of supportive housing programs for individuals with mental health challenges. They argued that proper accommodation and support services could have prevented his dangerous behavior entirely. As Davies continued his recovery, he expressed a desire to someday apologize personally to the guards and officers who had been affected by his actions. His growing awareness of the fear and disruption he had caused became an important part of his therapeutic progress. The incident had lasting impacts on everyone involved, from the guards who had faced the immediate threat to the policymakers who recognized the need for better mental health support systems. What began as a moment of crisis had evolved into an opportunity for positive change in how society addresses the complex challenges of mental illness and social vulnerability. Story Part 6. 6 months after the confrontation at Buckingham Palace, Robert Davies stood before Magistrate Judge Helen Crawford in Westminster Magistrates' Court, bearing little resemblance to the wild-eyed intruder who had charged at the Royal Guards with a screwdriver. Properly medicated and wearing clean clothes provided by the social services team, he appeared calm and lucid as he awaited sentencing. Dr. Elizabeth Harper testified about Davies's remarkable progress during his treatment at St. Mary's Hospital. The psychiatrist explained how a combination of medication, therapy, and stable housing had transformed her patient from a person in crisis to someone capable of understanding the gravity of his actions and working toward rehabilitation. The courtroom was filled with an unusual mix of observers. Marcus Thompson sat in the gallery, having been granted permission to attend after requesting to see the resolution of the case. His presence demonstrated the professional interest that security personnel maintained in understanding the outcomes of incidents they had handled. Officer Patricia Reeves also attended, accompanied by Detective Inspector Chen, both curious to witness the conclusion of a case that had tested their professional skills and reminded them of the human complexities behind security threats. Their successful intervention had prevented tragedy, but they understood that the real victory would be Davies's successful reintegration into society. Davies's attorney, Sarah Mitchell, presented a comprehensive mitigation package that detailed her client's mental health history, the circumstances leading to his breakdown, and the extensive support system now in place for his continued recovery. She emphasized that he posed no ongoing threat to public safety when properly supervised and medicated. The prosecution, while acknowledging the defendant's mental health challenges, stressed the seriousness of his actions and the potential for tragedy that had been narrowly averted. The Crown Prosecution Service representative noted that security personnel and tourists had been genuinely frightened by the confrontation. Judge Crawford carefully reviewed the extensive psychiatric reports, character references from hospital staff, and detailed plans for Davies's continued supervision. She noted the progress he had made during treatment and his apparent genuine remorse for his actions, while also recognizing the serious nature of his offense. In a compassionate but firm judgment, the magistrate sentenced Davies to 18 months imprisonment, suspended for 2 years, conditional on his compliance with mental health treatment, and regular supervision by probation services. The sentence balanced punishment with rehabilitation, recognizing both public safety concerns and the defendant's mental health needs. Davies stood quietly as the sentence was read, showing visible relief that he would not be returning to prison. His treatment team had prepared him for various possible outcomes, but the suspended sentence would allow him to continue his recovery in the community while being held accountable for his actions. The judge also issued a restraining order, preventing Davies from entering the immediate area around Buckingham Palace, recognizing that returning to the scene of his crisis could potentially trigger additional psychological difficulties. The restriction was designed to protect both Davies and the public from any future incidents. Following the sentencing, Davies was transferred to a supervised housing facility operated by a mental health charity. The accommodation provided him with his own room while ensuring that trained staff were available to monitor his medication compliance and emotional well-being. Around the clock, Marcus Thompson approached Davies's attorney after the hearing, expressing his hope that the former defendant would continue his recovery successfully. The guard's gesture of goodwill surprised many observers but reflected his understanding that the man who had threatened him had been driven by illness rather than malice. Dr. Morrison, who had provided expert testimony about Davies's mental state during the incident, reflected on how the case illustrated both the challenges and successes possible within the British legal system's approach to mental health issues. The outcome demonstrated that treatment and rehabilitation could be prioritized alongside public safety concerns. The Palace security team conducted their final review of the incident, incorporating lessons learned into their standard operating procedures. The case had validated their training while highlighting the importance of recognizing mental health crises and responding with appropriate restraint and professionalism. Davies began working with vocational rehabilitation specialists to develop skills that would help him return to employment. When his recovery progressed sufficiently, his background in construction provided a foundation, but his treatment team recognized that he would need significant support to rebuild his confidence and capabilities. The incident had sparked broader policy discussions about mental health services in London, leading to increased funding for crisis intervention teams and homeless support services. Davies's case became an example cited by advocates pushing for improved coordination between health, housing, and law enforcement agencies. Media coverage of the sentencing focused on the successful rehabilitation aspects of the case, highlighting how proper treatment had transformed a dangerous situation into an opportunity for healing. The story provided hope for other families dealing with mental health crises and demonstrated the effectiveness of comprehensive treatment approaches. Officer Reeves received a commendation from the Metropolitan Police for her professional handling of the incident, with her actions being cited in training materials for other officers. Her quick thinking and precise execution had prevented potential tragedy while treating a mentally ill individual with appropriate dignity. The charitable organization Housing Davies reported that donations had increased Significantly following publicity about the case, public interest in supporting mental health services had grown as people understood the connection between adequate treatment and preventing dangerous behavior. As Davies settled into his new routine of medication, therapy sessions, and gradually increasing independence, he began volunteering with organizations that supported other homeless individuals. His personal experience with mental health crisis gave him credibility and empathy when working with people facing similar challenges. The palace continued to welcome millions of visitors each year, with the incident becoming part of the institution's history, while serving as a reminder of the professionalism required of those who protect it. The royal guards maintained their ceremonial duties while remaining prepared for the serious security responsibilities that lay beneath the pageantry. 1 year after the confrontation, Davies wrote a letter to Marcus Thompson, expressing his gratitude for the guards' restraint and professionalism during the crisis. The correspondence marked a significant milestone in his recovery, demonstrating his ability to take full responsibility for his actions while appreciating those who had handled his crisis with dignity. Marcus read the handwritten letter in his quarters at the barracks. Moved by Davies's articulate expression of remorse and gratitude, the guard had often wondered about the man who had charged at him with a screwdriver, and learning about his recovery provided a sense of closure to an incident that had stayed with him throughout the year. The exchange of letters led to a carefully supervised meeting between Davies and several of the security personnel who had been involved in the incident. The gathering, arranged through official channels and mental health professionals, allowed all parties to discuss their experiences and find mutual understanding. Davies's transformation impressed everyone who met him during this reconciliation process. His articulate speech and genuine concern for others contrasted sharply with the desperate, incoherent individual who had created chaos at the palace gates. The meeting validated the approach of treating his case as a mental health crisis, rather than purely criminal behavior. Dr. Harper documented Davies's case in medical journals, contributing to the growing body of research on effective treatment approaches for individuals who commit criminal acts while experiencing severe psychiatric episodes. His successful rehabilitation became a model for other treatment programs across the United Kingdom. The vocational rehabilitation program helped Davies secure part-time employment with a construction company that specialized in hiring individuals with histories of mental health challenges. His employer reported that he was a reliable and skilled worker who took his second chance seriously and contributed positively to the workplace environment. 2 years after the incident, Davies had become a regular volunteer speaker at mental health awareness events, sharing his story to help others understand the importance of seeking treatment and the possibility of recovery even after serious psychiatric crises. His presentations were particularly powerful because of his firsthand experience with both breakdown and healing. The restraining order preventing him from visiting the palace area was eventually modified to allow supervised visits as part of his ongoing therapy, helping him confront and process the location where his crisis had reached its climax. These carefully managed visits, conducted with his treatment team, helped complete his psychological healing process. Marcus Thompson was promoted to sergeant within the Royal Guard. His professional handling of the Davies